All right, well, welcome everyone to module number 1 in this Bitcoin Masterclass. The first module is simply entitled, What is Money? Now, if you were coming here hoping for just a straight dive into technical explanations, that's really not the best place to start understanding Bitcoin. To understand why Bitcoin has gotten so much attention, has garnered so much interest, has really pilled people, for lack of a better term, as to what it is and what it can do. There's a lot of philosophical things that need to be talked about, like the question of what is money. Because if Bitcoin is trying to be money, you have to know what money is in the first place in order to be able to see how good of a money it is. And like I said in the introduction, we're trying to layer our knowledge as we go through these modules. So the question of what is money and how has money been used throughout history is a very important starting point to really grasping the significance of Bitcoin. So this is where we start. Now, what kinds of things are we going to cover in this course or in this module of the course? We're going to ask the question of why money? Why does money even exist? What purpose does it serve? A lot of people don't really think about things like money. They just take them for granted. And we're going to go through the significance of money and what purpose it serves. Second, we're going to talk about what makes good money, right? So good money is going to have certain characteristics, right? Why do societies and economies choose certain things as a medium of exchange versus something else? It's important questions to ask and to cover. We're going to talk about the types of money in history because we're going to see these examples of things that were used as money. And that will give us an idea of what sort of things make a good money, what societies have decided can function as a medium of exchange in the past. And we're going to talk about the progression of different types of money. So there's commodity money, representative money, and fiat money. Those are all very different. And it's very important to understand those differences and understand what kind of money you are currently using. And lastly, we're going to talk about the problems with modern fiat money, which is the regime we're currently under. We're going to talk about inflation, the centralization of control, monopoly, some other topics that are really important. So this is a really good, robust explanation and history, if you will, of money. We're going to answer all these questions. Let's get into it. So the first question is outlined is, why does money exist? Why does it exist at all? So most societies in their infancy start with a barter system. So you have things that you make or that you produce off of your land, and the way that you get other things that you need is to barter with other people. So let's say that you are a farmer, but what you need is some new farming tools. You need a new hatchet, let's say. So you might take a bushel or two of apples and go to the local blacksmith and trade for that new hatchet that you need. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that. The barter system works, and it's all just goods that you're trading, goods that you've produced, and you're using your own productions to then acquire other things that you need that other people are more skilled at and can produce quicker, better, faster than you can. But you come onto this problem of what's called the double coincidence of wants, right? So if you have apples and you want a hatchet, you have to find someone who A, has hatchets to sell, and B, specifically wants apples, right? If money doesn't exist, you can't just say, well, this bushel of apples is worth $40 and your hatchet is worth about $40. So let's trade these because they're equal in value. Like, if that person doesn't want apples, you can't get the hatchet, right? And maybe that person wants apples, but if you only specifically want a hatchet and someone else comes to you wanting apples, they don't have a hatchet, they can't get your apples, right? So you have to have this overlap where both parties want the same thing in order for the barter system to work. And that's really inefficient and makes things really complicated. Portability of goods is also a problem. If you're wanting to make a very large purchase that would, in theory, be worth thousands of apples, you have to go carting your thousands of apples around trying to find the new plow or the new wagon or whatever big purchase is you're wanting to make. You can't just walk around with money because money doesn't exist. So maybe you could walk around claiming you have certain apples, and then the buyer has to come verify that you have those apples. You have to verify that they have what you want, and then you have to arrange for the transportation of these goods to overlap and make that exchange. So again, it works, but it's very inefficient, and it's not what we're used to having to deal with. But without money, again, you've got this portability of goods problem. So this enters the need for a medium of exchange, something that can speed up this economic activity that people want to do. If we can somehow get rid of the double coincidence of wants, so we can somehow get rid of the portability problem, then that's going to really help society function much smoother. So we have this need that naturally comes about within a barter system for a medium of exchange for people to use. So we're going to call this medium of exchange in society a money. That's how we're going to define it. And if you think about what you would need for that medium of exchange to work well, you can start to think of certain characteristics that medium of exchange item would have to have in order to help replace and improve the barter system that exists from the beginning. So for the medium of exchange idea to work, it would need certain characteristics. This medium would have to have certain things about it. First of all, it would have to be durable. Can it withstand wear and tear over time? You need something that's not going to, let's say you sell a bunch of apples, you get this money, you have to know it's not going to decay or rot away over time. It has to be a durable material. It needs to be portable, right, to overcome that portability problem. You need to be able to take it to a marketplace where people are selling their goods and you're not having to cart it around on the back of a horse. You need to be able to carry it in your pocket, ideally, to be able to go to the market, purchase what you need, or sell things. And if you're selling things, not have to have a big space behind you to collect all this money. You want to be able to put it in a cash register or a bag. So portability is very important. Divisibility can be broken into smaller units because you need this portable money, portable, durable money, to be able to go buy a hatchet or be able to go buy a team of oxen, right? And those things vary greatly in value. So you still need small portable units that vary in value. Recognizable. When you go to the market and you're exchanging money with someone, you need to be able to easily look at it and say, yep, that's money. If it's something that is hard to discern and figure out if it's money or not, that just goes back to slowing down the exchange process. And we don't want that. We want something someone can pick up, look at, and see like, yes, that is money, that is worth X amount of value, and I will sell you this for this coin or this whatever. And lastly, scarcity is incredibly important. Is the supply limited and predictable? You can't use acorns, for instance, as a money because millions of them get produced every year. They get remade, and there's more of them each year if the trees keep growing. Something that does not have a predictable supply is not a good money. If you know from economics the concept of supply and demand, if you have an ever-increasing supply of something, the demand and value goes down. The money cannot have a consistent value if there's constantly more of it being produced, and you need something that's going to have a steady value. So scarcity is very important. There can't be new money. This medium of exchange, whatever you choose, can't constantly be growing in how much of it exists, or it ruins the ability of the money to be stable. It also reduces the value of everyone's money over time, which is so. These are some of the characteristics that the medium of exchange money would have to have in order to be a good money. And again, just to reiterate, the functional medium of exchange in an economy is money. That's how we're kind of defining money. Whatever your economy uses as this medium of exchange to alleviate the barter system, that is okay. And it needs to have these characteristics in order to be good So what have we seen in history regarding money? This is going to give us a better picture of how these things have fleshed out over time. So in history, there have been some types of money that we can put into specific categories that are helpful for us in thinking about how money has evolved over time. The first one is commodity or hard money. That's things like gold or silver. Gold and silver meets all of those criteria that we just talked about. It's scarce, it's durable, it's portable, it's divisible into bigger and smaller units and still being pretty portable. So it has all those qualities that people look for. And so societies tend to figure out for themselves what works well as a commodity money and pick that for the money that alleviates the barter system. So in history, silver and gold has been chosen a lot as the money of various societies. But then there's a second type of money that we can get into called representative or claims money or banknotes. So people may not want to hold all of their gold because they could get robbed. People may have a lot of gold or want to buy something very large with that gold, and you still get into the portability problem because gold is heavy. So over time, there becomes this desire to have a place called a bank where you can deposit your commodity money and receive a banknote back certifying how much gold or commodity money you are storing with them. Okay? So instead of having to carry around 100 pounds of gold to go purchase something, you can now have a banknote that says, yes, this person has 100 pounds of gold on deposit with us, the local bank of wherever. And the bank kind of becomes this commerce point or part of commerce within that society so that people can deposit their money with them for safekeeping, security. They don't have to carry it around with them everywhere. You can do things like have banknotes that are specific to you. So if you got robbed of your gold, if you're carrying gold and you get robbed, you would lose it. But if you were carrying a banknote that's only good for your name, then maybe it would be something the bank could say, oh no, this was robbed. We don't have to honor this. And it also over time gives rise to the opportunity for the bank to make loans and people who've deposited their gold there to earn interest on their commodity money. So there's a lot of positives in having a banking system in a society, because then also the loan generation leads to people building more businesses. It builds the economy further. So there's this positive cycle that happens when you have a bank. So over time, then what happens is these banknotes start to take the place of the commodity money as the real money in society. So eventually you get to the point of no one's exchanging gold anymore. People are just exchanging banknotes. Okay. So now what is the money in society? Really, the money is the banknotes, and society gets used to that, and they're used to not touching, seeing, or having anything to do with the hard money, the commodity money. They're used to the banknotes being the money, and that's what people are paid in. They exchange goods and services in these banknotes. Okay? Then you have fiat, which is a money that is centrally issued and is not really backed by anything. So with the representative or claims money, you know that you can take that money to the bank, take that claims money to the bank at any point and get 100 pounds of gold, 20 pounds of gold, whatever the banknote says, you can always go to the bank and get that back out. With fiat money, there is now no claim attached to the money. It's just been issued and society is using it as money, and whoever's issuing it, a bank, government, whoever, you're just having to trust them that they're not going to flood the market with more of it and reduce the value. that they're going to be good stewards of the fact that they're the ones issuing this money. Because you can't now go back and just, if there's a trust problem, go back and say, I don't really trust what you guys are doing. I'll take my gold, please. That's no longer an option when you have a fiat system. So it introduces this big trust mechanism that has to be accounted for. So these money types show a common societal progression. We've seen this progression play out over time worldwide. It's not always exactly the same, but this is the direction things trend over time. It's from the commodity money to the representative money, then to the fiat. And we're going to go through how that's played out in the United States here in a minute, but you can kind of see how step 1 to 2 makes sense in the sense of trying to help continue to improve the economy and society. But then step 2 to 3 makes sense from the perspective of, once a government or a bank has that much control over an economy, it's hard for people to resist that kind of power and influence and not fully take control through issuing fiat currency. And so let's kind of walk through how that's played out in the United States, and that'll kind of give you an idea of a framework for how this can play out in any human society. So, we'll get to the USA in a minute, but first let's talk about commodity money is held by individuals. This can be deposited into banks, leading to representative money that is issued by banks, and they're now holding the commodity money. And the claims on the commodity money become the most used money in society. So they're not using commodity money anymore. Now they're using this claims money. This creates a centralization of the commodity money. All the commodity money is stored in the bank or with the government or wherever, but over time it centralizes all of the commodity money and people aren't used to seeing it or touching it. And this introduces trust into the money system because you're trusting the bank, you're trusting that centralized figure to hold your money well and do right with it. But the inflation of claims can happen because remember, now banknotes are the money, and so people are getting paid in these banknotes. Banks can start to have a fractional reserve system where they issue more banknotes than what they have gold on hand and on reserve, and the inflation can just grow and get out of control until the situation is unsustainable, and then the bank says, no more redemptions of money, just use the money as currency in society, that's all you need. But now it's fiat money. It's not backed by anything. You can't go redeem it for a commodity money. And that's kind of the process that's walked through. So USA money history. This is the longest slide in this presentation, but I promise you it is well worth your time to understand the progression of how America and the world, as a result, has gotten to the place that it is at right now, to where Bitcoin has become an attractive option for people. So hang with me through this slide. If you're into history, you will love it. So again, you start in a society with a hard money, commodity money. It's held by individuals. The individuals start to put their money into the banks, and the banks issue claims on that money. That's the process that kind of takes place naturally through an economy, through a society. Happened here in America. After we settled, banks started cropping up. Banking systems in various cities, towns, states, all that were cropping up. Natural progress of things in an economy. Then, in 1913, the Federal Reserve was established. There was some justification for it. There had been a lot of turmoil in the U.S. monetary markets in various ways, and you had lots of different banks issuing their own banknotes, so you didn't have like a common America-wide money in the same way at that time. So the Federal Reserve was established to try and help create a centralized control of the U.S.'s banking systems. Now, Federal Reserve is a little bit of a misnomer. It's not federal. It's actually a group or cartel of banks in the United States. So it's not run by the federal government, even though it's called the Federal Reserve. It's also not a reserve. It has no commodity asset. It doesn't have a reserve of commodity assets on hand. So even the name is a little deceptive. But this was the beginning of the United States having a central point of control over the U.S. monetary system. And at this point, people were well into using claims money as money and not using gold or silver so much. So that's the place that America was at this point. And the Federal Reserve had the power to kind of control the U.S. currency a little bit. So moving on from there, you now have a central bank, right? You've now established that in your society, and you can't really unring that bell, right? Once you develop a government program, it tends to grow and grow in its scope and power kind of indefinitely. It's the same thing with the Federal Reserve. It may have had just an initial intention, arguably anyway, that was good. You can go and read the book called The Creature from Jekyll Island. Jekyll Island is where the Federal Reserve was first established, and it talks about the process that was gone through in order to establish the Federal Reserve. It's a little sneaky from the beginning. You see how the lure of having that kind of power was playing a role in the establishment of the Federal Reserve, even if they were justifying it as a means to help the country. So if you want to do some deeper research, I'm just kind of giving you what happened in history of the United States, but there's much you could dive into if you want to. So now there's a U.S. central bank. Then in 1944, you have the Bretton Woods Agreement. What is the Bretton Woods Agreement? Once World War II in Europe had completed, there was a lot of economic devastation throughout Europe, understandably so. There was a need for rebuilding. There was a need for loans, smooth commerce. The economies of various countries were in turmoil. Essentially, the U.S., since it had the largest commodity money reserves, which was gold, they had the largest gold reserve at the time, stepped in, and it was agreed that basically the U.S. dollar, backed by all of the gold in Fort Knox, would just become the world reserve currency, essentially. And all other countries' currencies could be pegged to the dollar because the dollar was backed by gold. So at the moment, it was viewed as, the dollar is this really strong claims money that is backed by all this gold. Let's have that be our reserve currency, and we can peg all of our different countries' currencies to that so that we have agreement on what the different currencies are worth. We can have country to country trade going on a lot better, and commerce happening across borders a lot easier. The establishment of the US dollar as the world reserve currency was an important step in getting Europe's economy going again. After that, the Pacific Theater was not completed yet, but Bretton Woods established, as far as the Western world goes, the US dollar as the world reserve currency. But if you think about it, what has now happened is you've put the entire world on a claims money that is controlled by a central bank, which is going to have some knock-on effects, as we're going to see. 1971, the Nixon shock happens. As we've talked about before, once the claims money becomes the money in societies, it tends to get overissued. It tends to get inflated by the controlling entity. This was no different here. The supply of US dollars worldwide was outstripping the amount of gold that the United States has. Now, you could say that some of that was justified because the world needed dollars in order for the economies to continue to pick back up. But you can also see the temptation when you have the kind of control over the world reserve currency, which is just a claims money now, to kind of start to enter your own fractional reserve system where you only have a portion of the dollars actually able to be backed by the gold that you have. And in 1971, there was going to essentially be a run on, without getting into the weeds, there was a lot of redemption that was going to happen of people trying to take their US dollars and redeem it for gold. And from Bretton Woods until 1971, you take 35 US dollars and redeem it for 1 ounce of gold in the United States. Anyone could do this, other countries could do it. And there was a lot of dollars that were going to be flooding back to the US demanding gold. And this was not good, and it's questionable as to whether or not all of the redemptions would be able to happen. So without getting, again, you can go deep down the rabbit hole on the causes of the Nixon shock. But in 1971, President Nixon shut the U.S. gold window. Okay, no longer could you redeem U.S. dollars for gold. And that fully established fiat money. And again, because the US dollar was the world reserve currency, it didn't just put the United States on a fiat money system. It put the entire world on a fiat money system because the US dollar was the world reserve currency. So now you have a situation where there's not really any checks or balances on the US dollar because you can't redeem it for gold. That is going to cause a lot of problems. So once you get into fiat money territory, you've basically put all of your trust in some centralized entity that they are going to be good stewards of this money system that they've been given. And there's not really any checks and balances on it. It's just a trust setup. And that's generally not a good setup to run monetary system because power naturally accrues people or draws people who just want power and want control and who want to gain the levers of power, including the ability to manipulate the monetary system to their advantage. So, as I said, this is also world money history. It's not just USA at this point, it's now world. Since 1971, the world reserve currency has been fiat money, which continually inflates its value away. And this is a big idea I want you guys all to understand, that since 1971, essentially the entire world has been on a fiat money system because the world reserve currency switched to fiat, from being claims money to fiat. And it's been that way since 1970. What are the impacts of such a move? We're going to go through some of these charts, and it's going to illustrate a lot of the societal knock-on effects that have happened ever since we moved to a fiat money system. So there's no system of checks and balances on the Federal Reserve. Again, it's not a part of the federal government. It is neither federal nor reserve. So it's not part of the system of checks and balances that exist in the U.S. government. Inflation is legal counterfeiting. What do I mean by that? If you have someone who has a money printer in their garage where they can just print dollars as they desire to do so and then use it to buy things, that's called counterfeiting. It's illegal. But when the government does it, it's just called inflation, right? Context is the only thing that's changing. The actions are not changing. The government is essentially doing the same thing as money counterfeiters, but it's legal because they're the government, they're the central bank. Do with that thought what you will. Regardless of how you think about counterfeiting, inflation is an invisible tax. It always is. If the government is printing more money and putting it into the supply, all of the money that you hold is losing value. And the government is using the dollars that they've printed to purchase goods and services that they want. Goods and services for the government. So that's a tax. If the government prints $1 million, the value of everyone else's money in society has gone down by $1 million. And the government then uses that $1 million to pay for things. That is what a tax is. But inflation is not a tax that is voted on, is passed through Congress, has representatives involved that can be recalled and have to answer their constituents for. It just happens invisibly in the background. And if you don't know that it's happening, your money's just continuously losing money, and you as a society are unaware. It takes advantage of people's trust, takes advantage of people being uninformed. And the U.S. government benefits from what's called the Cantillon effect. What that means is whoever has the money printer gets to spend uninflated dollars. So if the government printed that $1 million, everyone else's money doesn't lose value through inflation because, again, supply and demand, as more supply of dollars go into the system, it makes the prices of everything go up because there's more dollars chasing fewer goods. The goods haven't gone in value, they haven't gotten better. It's just there's more dollars now. It takes more dollars to buy that same good. So when the government prints $1 million, inflation doesn't happen until they start putting that $1 million into the system, which means they're buying things. So that means the government gets to spend their money on uninflated goods. Let's say the government's going to buy apples, and apples are currently $1. If they print $1 million to buy apples, they get to buy $1 million worth of apples. But once they've bought those apples, now all that new money is in the system. So the supply of money has gone up and the supply of apples has gone down. The apple is now $1.15 for you to purchase. So the government came, printed money, which was an invisible tax on you, and now gets to go buy things before inflation happens that they cause, and then you have to buy things with your deflated money buying inflated goods. That's how the Cantillon effect works. Whoever has the money printer gets to spend those dollars before the inflation that they're going to cause kicks in, because it's them purchasing that causes that inflation. Hope that makes sense. And what are the impacts? Here's a chart with an arrow on it showing 1971 and showing the U.S. national debt. So you can see it kind of started to creep up before 1971. Afterwards, it started to skyrocket. Once you remove physical restraint from people, stuff gets unrestrained. Once people think we can just print money and take care of the problem, people are going to go into debt because they don't value money. This is the CPI. It's a measure of inflation. You can see in 1971, things really started to escalate. After that, the prices of goods started to go up. Why is that? It's because the government was printing money. There was more money chasing the same amount of goods, so everything becomes more expensive, which means the value of your savings is continuously going down. Inflation has happened. How long does it take you to save for a house nowadays? It was a little more consistent up until 1971, and then went up pretty dramatically. And what that points to is that the level of inflation, which is how much the price of scarce assets is going up, is faster than how much people are making more money, how much people are getting raises, how much people are being paid for their labor it's not going up as fast as inflation is. That means that because of inflation, everyone's quality of life, on average, the country's quality of life is going down over time. Inflation of the money supply is going up faster than people's ability to get raises and make more money to keep up. And that shouldn't be. America has become a nation of dual income couples. You see here the chart for households that have both spouses working versus husband only working. It's the number of households that now have both spouses working has gone up dramatically since 1971 because, again, you're not able to get the same amount of value out of your labor as you used to be able to. Income gains were pretty consistent over time, but then after 1971, you see this split of the rich getting richer at a much faster pace. But why does that happen? Well, there's a few reasons. One is those who hold assets are scarce. So when inflation happens, those assets go up in value proportionately. If you're someone who's poorer, who just lives paycheck to paycheck, you don't have assets. You have your job that's paying you a certain hourly wage. And if your raises aren't going up faster than inflation is, you're getting poorer. Inflation has a disproportionate negative impact on poor people and benefits those who already have assets. It also benefits those who have the levers of power, which also tend to be people who are already well off. So everything about a central bank being able to control the money supply, good for the rich, bad for the poor, generally speaking. Here's a new chart showing the disparity, drastic disparity between how much incomes are going up and how much home values are going up. When the youngest generation complains about homes not being affordable for them, they are not just being whiny millennials. They are telling the truth. Things have become very disparate in terms of income versus house prices because of inflation. If you are someone who is insecure about money, which is a natural thing that happens in an inflationary environment, you're going to be more nervous about bringing children into the world. There's been this drastic drop-off in family size since 1971. Saving money is generally a deflationary thing for you to do if you're not in a fiat money regime. So if you save, think about it, if you save $100 and don't buy something, that thing that you were going to buy a year later it's not the newest model anymore. It's a year older. You can now buy it for less money. So when you're in a place and time where you're not under a fiat money regime, you should be able to save money. And then that saved money actually gains purchasing power over time because the economy improves, products and supplies become higher quality, all these things. There's a lot of economic forces that push down the price of things over time. That's completely counteracted by inflation. And as you can see here, it leads to insecurity. You need both couples working to make ends meet. Doesn't leave room for having children the way that it used to. And something else that's related to what I said earlier about inflation benefiting or not as much impacting those who own assets is you can look at racial disparities in the US. So once you start to remove discriminatory laws, you see this fast progress of the Black communities starting to catch up in terms of their average income with white families. Because once you remove those weights that were on them, they start to catch up really quickly, which is how it should be. But you introduce the inflation and fiat currency, people who already own assets, which is in America would have been disproportionately white people, the people already owning assets now have a much bigger advantage over those that are trying to catch up and accumulate those assets. So there's a lot of things that have hurt race relations in the United States, some of them legitimate, some of them not. This is one of those things that is just kind of an injustice because the fiat system disproportionately benefits the rich and powerful, disproportionately negatively affects those who don't have assets already. So I show you all these things to kind of give you an idea of how much people don't realize they're living in this negative, this soup of negative consequences that result from living under a central bank and under a fiat currency that can be inflated away in its value. And really, again, because the US dollar is the world reserve currency, the whole world to some degree is experiencing the effects of this, even if they don't realize it. This is a pretty broad overview. You can really go down a pretty deep rabbit hole looking at the negative consequences of living under this kind of monetary regime and what it does. To wrap this module up, as we've talked about money, I want to leave you with this quote from F.A. Hayek. I don't believe we shall ever have a good money again before we take the thing out of the hands of government. That is, we can't take it violently out of the hands of government. All we can do is by some sly roundabout way introduce something they can't stop. So since you are here for a Bitcoin Masterclass, I hope that this quote gives you some foreshadowing as to why Bitcoin exists. Thank you very much for being with me and watching this first module on what is money. I hope that it has been helpful and educational to you, and I hope that it has laid a good foundation as we move forward for you understanding why the characteristics of Bitcoin as a money are so significant and beneficial to society as a whole. Please like and subscribe so that you'll be notified when new modules come out or I release other videos, and so that other people can find this content because they may also find it helpful. As I said in the introduction, I would love for you to leave any comments or questions you have below as well. I'll be very attentive in trying to answer questions people have about anything I may have missed or that needs clarification from this video. I really look forward to all of you continuing with me as we continue to go layer by layer down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. But until the next module, thank you for being here. I look forward to seeing you there.